This is NASA TV.
Good afternoon from NASA's Johnson Space Center, and thanks for joining us today for NASA's SpaceX Crew-3 Crew News Conference. Joining us today are the Crew-3 astronauts, NASA astronauts Raja Chari, Tom Marshburn, and Kayla Barron, as well as European Space Agency astronaut Matthias Maurer. NASA's SpaceX Crew-3 mission is set to carry these astronauts aboard a Crew Dragon spacecraft on a Falcon 9 rocket to the International Space Station October 30th from Launch Complex 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Raja Chari is commander of the Crew Dragon spacecraft and the Crew-3 mission. He is responsible for all phases of the flight from launch to re-entry, and this will be his first space flight. Tom Marshburn is the pilot of the Crew Dragon spacecraft and second in command for the mission. He is responsible for spacecraft systems and performance. This mission will be his third visit to the space station, and he joins a short list of distinguished flyers who have launched on 3 different vehicles. Kayla Barron is a mission specialist for Crew-3. As a mission specialist, she will work closely with the commander and pilot to monitor the spacecraft during the dynamic launch and re-entry phases of flight. This will be her first space flight. And Matthias Maurer will also serve as a mission specialist for Crew-3, working closely with Raja Chari and Tom Marshburn, and this mission will also be his first space flight. We're going to be taking questions through the phone bridge and on social media today using the hashtag AskNASA, but before we begin taking questions, let's run down the line with some opening remarks from our Crew-3 astronauts. Raja, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Courtney. Very excited to be here and being this close to launch. So first off, we probably need to let people know we can stop calling it Capsule 210, which is the serial number for our SpaceX Dragon, and we can come up with and let people know the crews come up with the name of the vehicle, which is Endurance, and it speaks to us on a number of levels. First off, just a tribute to the tenacity of human spirit as we push humans and machines farther than we ever have, going both to stay in extended stays for low Earth orbit, opening it up to private companies and private astronauts, and knowing that we'll continue our exploration to go even further and continue. And also a nod to the fact that development teams, the production teams, the training teams that got us here have endured through a pandemic. And then, of course, just the fact that we are going to reuse this vehicle. So one of the really cool things about the SpaceX Dragon is we'll be the first ones to use Endurance, but it won't be the last time it's used. It's going to be used many times by many missions, and it'll continue to support long-duration space flights, just like the one Mark Vande Hei is doing up on the space station, where he'll eventually become the longest-duration human from the U.S. to be up on at the space station towards the end of our mission. And then also a nod to Captain Shackleton, and just the amazing story of the original Endurance. So we're proud to carry on that namesake and excited to get to fly an Endurance. As you mentioned, we'll be launching October 30th at the end of this month in the middle of the night, so stay up and catch us. And we'll be up there for 6 months, coming back in the spring of 2022. So we'll dock with the space station about 22 hours after we launch, and so that'll happen, and you can watch that all on nasa.gov. With that, I'll turn it over to Tom Marshburn, who'll talk about what we're doing up there for the 6 months we're on the space station.
Hey, like the rest of the crew, super excited to be going up and seeing the space station again. We'll be joining Expedition 66. Looking forward to seeing Anton, Mark, and Piotr when we're there. As always, there's going to be a really robust backbone of science that we're going to be executing throughout our entire mission. That's going to peak in December when the SpaceX Dragon arrives with a full compartment of more experiments for us to be doing, which we need to complete in that month so it can return back with the samples. But also during that time, I want to note that we're going to have spaceflight participants coming up on the Soyuz, private astronauts on the Axiom spacecraft. So we'll be inviting a lot of guests to the space station. Looking forward to helping introduce this new phase of human spaceflight, which will occur during our expedition. We have a lot of maintenance we're going to be doing. We want to keep the space station healthy. Some NASA events are going to occur while we're up there with the launch of the James Webb Telescope, launch of Artemis 1. So we're looking forward to having a nice seat, but also taking some pictures of those events as best we can as well. And now I'm going to hand it over to my crewmate, Kayla Barron.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today to talk a little bit about our upcoming mission. It's hard to express adequately how excited we are as a crew. We're definitely feeling ready to launch in just over 3 weeks, which is kind of crazy to think about. But as Tom and Raja both mentioned, we couldn't be more excited about joining the space station crew for Expedition 66. We have a lot of exciting things planned, from spacewalks to science experiments to visitors with the private astronaut missions and spaceflight participants. So it's kind of a dream mission for a rookie flyer to be joining such an experienced crew aboard the space station, and we're really excited to share more about it with you. And I'd like to turn it over to Matthias Maurer to introduce himself.
Yes, hello, I'm European Space Agency astronaut Matthias Maurer, and I'm really excited to fly to the station. The main objective for us flying to the station is to do science, lots of experiments. Together as a crew, we have around 350 experiments in our luggage. Roughly 10% of these are European experiments. And these experiments will range from material science, engineering, life sciences, technological demonstrations, but also experiments that enable us to do the next step from low Earth orbit to exploration to fly to the moon. So lots of exciting stuff that we will be performing. And we are all excited also to share what we are doing while in space. And back to Raja.
And I'll take it from here. We'll go ahead and open it up for questions now. If you're on the phone, just a reminder to press *1 when you're ready to ask your question, and *2 if your question has already been answered. And on social media, be sure to use the hashtag AskNASA if you'd like to submit a question. We'll start on the phone bridge with Bill Harwood from CBS News.
Yeah, hi, thanks. It's Bill Harwood, CBS at the Kennedy Space Center. For Tom, you're one of the handful of guys who've been assigned to 3 different spacecraft, the shuttle, the Soyuz, and now Crew Dragon. It's almost apples and oranges, but what are your impressions of the Dragon based on your training? How does it compare to the other spacecraft in terms of, creature comforts, the automation, and safety?
When you climb into, quote unquote, your spaceship, no matter what, it seems very, very special. There's lots of innovation in the Dragon, which we expected from our commercial partners anyway. It's a beautiful spacecraft. In terms of the human factors and the automation, they've taken on advances and have a lot of innovation there. Looking forward very much to seeing how that plays in as Raja commands and I pilot the vehicle and we put it through its paces again. So it's a huge amount of excitement. In some ways, though, leaving the launch pad 0 miles an hour to reaching low Earth orbit at 17,500, the physics are at play. Be very interested in seeing if there's really any difference in the feel of the Falcon 9 or not, and would love to talk about it. Look forward to talking about it when I get back.
And a NASA fan on social media asks, what are you guys most looking forward to on the space station?
I think most of us have the same 2 answers to that question. I think we're all really looking forward to looking out the window down at the beautiful Earth. And we're also all really looking forward to the opportunity, hopefully, to perform a spacewalk. So I think as long as we can knock out those 2 things, we'll be pretty happy campers. And in addition, we'll be excited about all of the amazing science we get to do every day. One of the sort of wise mantras in our office is there's nothing more important than the thing you're doing right now. And I think that's especially true when we're aboard the space station and have the opportunity to perform some incredible experiments on behalf of some amazing principal investigators on the ground.
And our next question comes from Marcia Dunn with Associated Press.
Hi. Thanks for doing this. I'm wondering if you've had a chance to meet the Axiom crew or the 2 Japanese tourists going up from Kazakhstan in December. Have you had a chance to get a warm, fuzzy feeling for who you're going to be living with for a couple weeks? And if not, have you touched base at all with them? And what's your overall views of having visitors pop in for a week or 2 who are not trained professionals? Thanks.
So we have got a chance to meet all of them, both the spaceflight participants from Japan as well as the Axiom crew. So we've met the Axiom crew both here and at SpaceX, and have met the Japanese crew here at Johnson Space Center. And so they have gone through basically enough training here at Johnson Space Center to be familiar with the modules that they'll be experiencing and some of the equipment, if we had off-nominal situations, to be at least familiar with it. And I think it's a great time in spaceflight to, we've talked for a really long time at NASA, and I think as a nation and as a world, about the idea of making low Earth orbit accessible. And I think during our increment, one of the coolest things we're going to do is see that happen with our own eyes, and see a private mission come to the space station. And our job is to help enable that. And so, it's very similar in my mind, being with an Air Force background, to your question about what we think about that. First, we think it's great. It's what NASA's here to do. When I look at it from an Air Force pilot background perspective, I think about, there's when you get on a commercial flight, you don't think about the fact that there's also private people flying around, private planes. There's military people flying around military planes, and everyone's doing that in the airspace, all doing different missions with different training and for different purposes. And I think the space station in low Earth orbit's eventually going to become very much like that. So there'll be private objectives, there'll be government objectives, and that can all coexist. And we're at the very beginnings of it. So it's a really cool time to be going up there. And I echo what Kayla and Matthias said, as rookies going up there especially, what an amazing opportunity to get to see that and be a part of a new sort of era in spaceflight.
And a Twitter user asks, how have the prior Dragon crews described splashdown to you?
Well, let's see. I think both Demo 2 and Crew 1 are the two that have come back so far, and I think they both had really nice conditions. As you know, Demo 2 was the first flight, the test flight, and then Crew 1 was the first operational flight. They came back at night. So we've now gotten to see both a daytime landing, a nighttime landing, and I think what they've both expressed is how pleased everyone has been with the quickness of the recovery forces. And so SpaceX and NASA have done a great job really making that as efficient as possible, from getting the capsule out of the water and the crew extracted. And now we recently saw with Inspiration 4 a very similar timeline. And so I think it's a great example of what the government and private companies working together can do, because we rely on the government for a lot of the search and rescue forces for off-nominal situations, and we rely on the private industry for the nominal recovery. And so getting those things working in tandem has so far worked out really well, and everyone has come out. I think we saw after the Crew 1, Hopper came out and even did a little dance of happiness. So he was obviously both physically and mentally very excited about the recovery.
And our next question comes from Chelsea Goad with Space.com.
Hi. So, Tom, as a veteran of 2 previous space station missions, what pieces of advice have you given your crewmates as they approach their first space flights? And do you anticipate sharing this kind of advice with private astronauts and other new flyers and passengers on the station?
Yes. I think the advice that I would give my crew, and have given my crew, and the private and astronauts and the spaceflight participants, would apply to anyone arriving. Spaceflight, we always say spaceflight is difficult. We all say that it's complicated. And when you actually arrive there and see it, not only is it an incredibly joyous and thrilling place to work, but indeed, every day is filled with solving 10,000 little problems just to get the simplest things done, as well as the complex work that we have to do. So the training has been good. You can believe in yourself. Not everything is going to go exactly right. That's okay. We're all here to help each other. Spaceflight is tough, and that's why they've picked these people to do these missions. So and to accomplish these tasks. So. It's good to be able to come away from a flight feeling good about what you've done, and to continue to be friends and have good relationships when you get back home. So we'll be focused on that.
And Nils on Twitter asks, which German food does Matthias Maurer plan to bring up to the International Space Station?
All right, I think I can take this question here. Well, I asked my fellow countrymen to choose for me. And it's a venison ragu that is prepared for me, also potato soup, very typical German food. And I bring it up and I will share it with my crewmates. It's a surprise for me, so I haven't tested it yet, but I'm pretty sure it will be very delicious and everyone is looking forward to it. And that's only one of the special meals that we have prepared from Europe. There's also another special meal linked with a special event next year, February most probably, where we will be linking the entire world, the entire planet around the topics of food, music, and linking the world with these topics to communicate space.
And just a reminder, if you're on our phone bridge, go ahead and press *1 when you're ready to ask your question, and *2 if your question has already been answered. And of course, on social media, be sure to use the hashtag AskNASA if you'd like to submit a question. Our next question comes from the phone bridge from Jackie Goddard with Times of London.
Hello, thanks for doing this. Currently on the ISS, there's a Russian actress shooting parts of a film whose plot pivots, I believe, on a heart surgeon who flies to space to perform some kind of medical heroics on an astronaut who suffered a heart attack. And I wondered whether one of you, maybe you, Dr. Marshburn, could give some insight into the extent of medical training that astronauts really do go through for a mission, what between you're able to handle up there in terms of medical emergencies, to give some idea of the reality behind this kind of storyline. Thank you.
Oh, sure. I'll say a few words, and then I'll also hand over to Matthias, who is EMT, a frontline medical care provider. We have kits that are pretty primitive in the sense that we can administer first aid. We can do some intensive care with the kits that we have, but the fact is, with the lack of staff, lack of the infrastructure that a hospital has, it's very limited what we could do. We could give intensive care to an astronaut for about 24 hours. Surgery, of course, with trying to maintain a sterile field would be quite a challenge in space. So I imagine the film would have to bring in some fiction in order to pull off heart surgery in space, but I think I'd probably look forward to seeing what they come up with. And Matthias, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, we all got our training, medical training, to deliver first aid. Well, we can, in case of severe problems, we obviously link up with the specialists on the ground. We also learned as part of our training how to do a tooth filling, or also even to pull a tooth. Also, I wouldn't recommend my dear crewmates to ask me to pull a tooth. I'm not an absolute specialist on that one. But I think we are well trained to help each other. And if there's a severe problem, then we obviously need to return to the ground and shorten the mission. But I would like also to take this topic of a heart problem in space and link it to the science that we are running in space. So obviously there are kids that are born that have heart problems that only have one heart chamber. And we are running experiments on the space station where we have cultures of cells that then we are growing in space. And we had in the past successes that heart muscles even formed beating heart cells in space. And I believe there is a huge potential with the science experiments that we are doing in space to help to contribute fighting diseases and problems on the ground.
Our next question comes from social media. This one is for Raja. You are one of only a few astronauts to command your first flight. Can you please talk about how the selection of who would command Crew-3 was made? Did you and Tom discuss it, or was the decision made by NASA?
So the decision was made by NASA, and I think it's really a tribute to the rest of the crew that they trust me to actually do this. I think it's more a testament to their training and skill that they trust a rookie to do that. I think it's also a sign of our trust in the maturity of the vehicle, the fact that we've proven it out. Obviously, spaceflight is never without risk, but I think we as an organization, as NASA, as our private companies and our partners, have had an extensive test program to try to make the vehicle as safe and ready for a crew as possible. But I think being in the commander role, I use this analogy all the time, but it's really more like being a coach than a dictator, and specifically more like a professional coach, where you're not really everyone on the crew is just as qualified and skilled to do the job, and it's just a matter of finding the best way to work efficiently together. And so that's kind of really my role. But everyone is more than qualified, and I'm just actually super happy to even have a chance to go to space, let alone in a brand new vehicle.
And our next question comes from Mark Carreau with Aviation Week.
Thank you. My question's for Tom, and Tom is a veteran on this flight, and Kayla is a freshman. How do you see this experience on this mission contributing to the future goal of Artemis returning human explorers to the moon?
This mission is critical, and the main reason for that is 3 people who haven't flown in space before getting the experience they need that'll prove so helpful when perhaps they'll be going to the moon. They'll play a part, and maybe crew members as well. So I feel very blessed to be able to be with them, provide whatever I can as a veteran, but otherwise just stay out of their way. They're operationally incredibly successful and capable as it is. So what they need is the experience of spaceflight. It'll do NASA and the space station and our science output do great things for that, but also for Artemis as well. So this is very important for that.
And Justin on Twitter asks, what experiments will Crew-3 be performing?
I'll take a first hack at that. There's so much going on up there. It's something we could each talk about for about an hour. There are experiments going on outside and inside the space station that we just tend or that we watch. The alpha magnetic spectrometer looking for the dark matter origins of the universe. The cold atom lab, which is trying to create creating an environment that's so super cold that you can actually study atomic particles close to their quantum state. A lot of medical experiments. We're testing out medical devices. I'm going to be working with a muscle sensor that will help us figure out how muscles atrophy in space, but also is tech development for this device so that people can have these evaluations done when they're in ICUs or out in the field. There'll be ultrasound going on, lots of material science. I love to work with and talk about the magnetic levitation experiments that are taking fluids and using zero-G and magnetic containment to really study how fluids in a sphere react with different temperatures. Matthias is a PhD in material science, and he probably would love to throw in some of those answers as well.
Well, I think you covered the field, Tom.
Okay, and our next question comes from Paul Brinkman with UPI.
Hi, yeah, thank you. My question is for Kayla. As the youngest member of the crew, maybe you'll be on the moon in a few years, but what do you think about the possibility of flying to a private space station after ISS is retired in 8 to 10 years, and whenever that happens? Would you like to do that, and how do you think that would change the nature of the experience?
I think that's something we've started to wrap our heads around as we think about what will happen when we don't have the amazing platform, the International Space Station, which we're hoping to continue to fly at least through 2030. So we're hoping the space station will be around for a little while longer. But like you mentioned, we're kind of at the dawn of a new era where we're bringing commercial partners into a low Earth orbit economy, to include partnering with companies who are interested in building destinations in low Earth orbit like commercial space stations. And I think going forward, we can imagine a world where we continue to visit those space stations as NASA astronauts to do science and also to train for future exploration missions. For me, my inspiration to apply to the NASA program was recognizing all the parallels between serving aboard a submarine, which is what I did before coming to NASA, and the space station itself. And so since coming here, as the Artemis program has really come into focus and become a big part of what we're hoping to do next. In fact, Artemis 1 is set to launch during our time on the space station, so we're really hoping we're on an orbit to catch some of that launch. But we're really starting to think about Artemis and how to prepare for it. And I think for those of the rookies on this flight, we're really thinking about this as the best way to train for those future exploration missions, to learn from the fantastic experience we have from operating the space station continuously for 20 years, learn from veteran flyers like Tom, and then also start thinking about how the technology we're using on the space station can be applied on the moon and eventually on a trip to Mars.
And next question is from Bill Harwood with CBS News.
Hey, thanks. I was going to ask Kayla roughly the same question, but let me ask it to Raja. You're both in the Artemis cadre. I assume that nobody's got cold feet, and both of you would like to go to the moon someday. So can you just, I know the next flight's the one that counts, but what do you think about that long term?
Well, I think, like Kayla said, I think that one of the most exciting pieces of science for me that we're doing up there is we call it ECLIS, which is basically life support type experiments, but it has both a terrestrial application for Earth, but also, to your point, Artemis. And so, we'll be looking at new waste management systems that involve better ways and more reliable ways to process waste. And kind of what's key there is to get to the moon and to stay there, which is the goal of Artemis, not to just go and come back, but to stay there and to go to Mars. You need more reliable equipment and higher recovery rates than what we have now. So, right now we recover between 70 and 90% of the water that's wasted on the space station that comes out of us, and we need to get that closer to 98%. And so some of the work we're doing up there and some of the equipment we'll be working on and using is designed and built to try to test that out. And so not only is it exciting because we're part of the group that's helping, as we look at Artemis designs and architecture, but it also helps here on Earth. So, if we could recover wastewater and have almost a closed loop cycle, that would solve a whole lot of problems here on Earth as well. And so I think for, all of us in the office, the Artemis team per se is just some people that have been helping, but really the whole office is involved with the Artemis program. And so when we're not assigned and getting ready for a mission, what we're doing in the office is helping with different programs, whether that's the Lunar Lander, the HLS, the Gateway, the Orion, the SLS, which is the rocket. So, astronauts in our office are involved in all these programs. And then, as you mentioned, and you're very rightfully, when you're assigned a mission, that's your main focus. And so, right now, our eyes are on successfully executing, getting to and from the ISS safely, integrating with Expedition 66, and making as much life-changing science happen as we can during the 6 months we're lucky to have up there.
And our next question comes from Whitney on Twitter, and she asks, what places on Earth are you most excited to see from space and photograph from the cupola?
I think I'll take this question. It's before becoming an astronaut, I actually fulfilled my big dream of traveling around the world for one entire year. And now from space, I obviously want to revisit these same places. And it's like a place in every continent of this beautiful planet. So I think I also want to discover Africa, because I haven't seen a lot of Africa, and the perspective from space, the third dimension, that's something really fabulous. And every time I think of it, I get goosebumps all over my skin.
And our next question comes from Marcia Dunn with the Associated Press.
Yes, for Raja, I'm wondering, yesterday we heard from the NASA managers that they're taking all lessons learned from the last Dragon flight with the Inspiration 4 crew, and I'm wondering if you've talked with Jared Isaacman about his trip and whether there's anything to be learned from their 3-day journey. Thanks.
So we had a chance to meet with some of the Inspiration 4 crew before we launched. We haven't talked to them since they've been back, I think, because they've been pretty busy. If you follow the news and social media in terms of sharing all the joy and experiments they did up there, we definitely have had a lot of interaction between SpaceX and NASA. And so even though that was a private mission, there is it's a common vehicle, the same vehicle we used on a previous NASA flight. And so there has been a whole bunch of engineering back and forth discussions, lessons learned past us that involve making improvements to our vehicle as well and the fleet. And so there's a very close relationship there. And so, yeah, we haven't talked to Jared, but there has been daily back and forth between NASA and SpaceX about where to make future fixes and enhancements and improvements.
And our next question comes from Dane on Twitter. What will the crew be dressing for Halloween?
I don't think we've necessarily decided yet, but I heard a rumor that Mark Vande Hei, who's currently on the space station, might have some plans in store for our Halloween costumes. So I think we maybe have a surprise in store when we cross the hatch for Halloween.
All right, and that's all the time we have for today. I just want to thank our Crew-3 astronauts for joining us and everyone who tuned in and asked questions through our various platforms to join in our conversation today. Be sure to tune in to watch this crew launch in Crew Dragon Endurance to the International Space Station in the early hours on October 30th. You can watch live online at nasa.gov, on NASA TV, or by following NASA on social media. That'll do it for our press conference today. Thanks for joining.